Now, a few weeks ago, Caleb talked about doubt and the role it plays in the Christian life. He gave us some examples of believers who experienced doubt. And he culminated with Thomas, who epitomizes doubt, who is particularly known for doubting. And this got me thinking, is there someone in the Bible who epitomizes faith? We have someone towards the end of the Bible who epitomizes doubt. Is there someone who epitomizes faith? Is there someone who is known for having strong faith? Well, of course there is. It's Abraham. It's Abraham. Well, did he experience doubts? Did he experience doubts? Did someone who is a paragon of faith experience doubts and unbelief? I'm going to spend some time this morning looking at Abraham's faith journey. Was his faith always strong? Or did it sometimes waver or falter? And if it did, how did God respond? Well, you've already had a spoiler with the reading from Genesis 20, because that's an example of Abraham's faith faltering. But Genesis chapter 12 is where Abraham's faith journey begins. In his first encounter with God, Abraham was told that he would become a great nation and inherit a homeland. Now, one man can't become a nation unless he has descendants. So the promise of a child was implicit in what God told Abraham. Despite the fact that she was infertile, God promised Abraham a child by his wife, Sarah. Now, in the Bible, Egypt is often a metaphor for unbelief. Not just unbelief, but slavery to sin. And this is clearly seen years later when thousands of Abraham's descendants wandered in the desert. And they frequently complained about their circumstances and expressed the desire to go back to Egypt, despite that meaning a return to slavery. Now, the first assault on Abraham's faith came when there was a famine in the land. And rather than trusting God's protection and wait for his guidance, Abraham decided to take matters into his own hands. He left the land God had sent him to, took Sarah down to Egypt. Rooted in unbelief, fear grew in Abraham's heart until he became paralyzed by it. You see, whilst faith trusts in God's promises, unbelief fixates on circumstances. Faith trusts in God's promises, but unbelief fixates on circumstances. And a very similar incident played out to the one that Charles read about in Genesis chapter 20. As Sarah was a beautiful woman, Abraham became convinced that Pharaoh or another Egyptian would kill him and take her. And again, Abraham failed to trust in God for protection. Instead, he tried to take control of his circumstances. And he instructed Sarah much like he did in the passage that was read, to tell the Egyptians that he was her brother. He wanted to hide the fact that they were man and wife, even if that meant lying. Or bending the truth to its absolute limit. In this moment of unbelief, Abraham completely reneged on his duty as Sarah's husband, failing to love and protect her. Ephesians 5 tells us that husbands are to love their wives as their own bodies. It's a little bit of a problem for me because, as you can see, I don't love my body quite as much as I should. But to save his own skin, Abraham was willing for his wife to enter harm's way. We can only imagine how Sarah must have felt when Pharaoh, one of the most, if not the most powerful man in the world at that time, took her into his harem. In this instance, Abraham not only proved unfaithful to his wife, but unfaithful to God. And how did God respond to Abraham's unfaithfulness? He remained faithful. He remained faithful. Rather than leaving Sarah to suffer the consequences of Abraham's bad decisions, God intervened in a miraculous way. To ensure Sarah's freedom, he sent diseases to plague Pharaoh's household. Years later, God would do exactly the same thing to free Sarah's descendants. When Pharaoh questioned Abraham and discovered his deception, he and Sarah were kicked out of Egypt. No surprises there. But God didn't give up on Abraham, despite his unbelief. And rather than take back his promise, because God doesn't do that, he repeated it. And he assured Abraham that he would have descendants, more numerous than the dust of the earth. If he was going to have descendants, then he had to remain alive. Sarah had to remain alive. Abraham could trust in God to protect them. He didn't need to fear. He didn't need to use deception. He didn't need to take matters into his own hands. Now, some years later, Abraham and Sarah still remained childless. And Abraham's faith, this is the man who is the paragon of faith. He is known for his faith. Abraham's faith wavered again. And he complained to God, and he said that his servant Eliezer would have to be his heir, since God still hadn't given him a son. And how did God respond to Abraham's impatience? He remained faithful. He remained faithful. God repeated his promise to Abraham for the third time. That was God's response. He repeated his promise. And this time he reassured Abraham that his descendants would come from his son. Not from his servant, but from his son, from his own flesh and blood. And we read in Genesis, then the Lord took Abraham outside and said to him, Look up into the sky and count the stars if you can. That's how many descendants you will have. And Abraham believed the Lord, and the Lord counted him as righteous because of his faith. Now, Abraham presumably must have told Sarah about this latest encounter with God. She was now in her 70s. She knew it was impossible for her to conceive naturally at this point. And this time, Sarah took matters into her own hands. Instead of trusting in God to intervene, as he had done in the past, she decided to use her servant girl, Hagar, as a surrogate mother. Of course, she desperately wanted a child. But she was prepared to manipulate her circumstances to get what she wanted, rather than wait on God to fulfill his promise. And how did Abraham respond to Sarah's plan? Well, he just went along with it. He just went along with it. Despite everything God had promised him, Abraham went along with it. In one of the worst displays of male passivity, Abraham just let it happen. And again, he reneged on his responsibility as a husband, just as Adam had done in the Garden of Eden. And this time around, he failed to give Sarah the support she needed. He failed to remind her of God's promise and his past faithfulness to them. And just as he had done with Adam and Eve, God allowed Abraham and Sarah to experience the consequences of their unbelief. And Abraham's open infidelity with Sarah's servant girl Hagar led to the birth of Ishmael. Now, I believe every child, whatever circumstances they are born into, every child is a blessing from God, a gift from God. However, and it's a big however, the family life of Abraham and Sarah became fractured, deeply unhappy, full of divided loyalties, jealousy, and fierce resentment. Hatred. Hatred that is still going on today and still causing conflict today. I'm sure we can all think of times when we've tried to control and manipulate a situation to get what we want. Times when we've tried to force a desired result. And we've done it in ways that disobey and dishonor God. Maybe we've told a lie. Maybe we've withheld information, which is as good as telling a lie. Maybe we've done something worse. When we do this, we inevitably bring pain on ourselves and on those around us. How did God respond to Abraham's faithless compliance with Sarah's plan? Well, you know what the answer is. he remained faithful. He remained faithful. Now, at the age of 99, Abraham had another encounter with God. Now, this was nearly 25 years after God first promised him descendants. And in this encounter, God repeated his promise of a child for the fourth time. For the fourth time. And he even changed Abraham's and Sarah's names. See, up to this point, their names have been Abram and Sarai. Not Abraham and Sarah, the names that we're more familiar with. But their new names, Abraham and Sarah, meant father and mother of nations. Father and mother of nations. God confirmed his promise to Abraham in a way that was impossible for him to forget. How did Abraham respond to this? Surely his faith wouldn't waver again. Well, he laughed sarcastically in unbelief and said, "Will a son be born to a man 100 years old? Will Sarah bear a son at the age of 90? And how did God respond? He remained faithful. He remained faithful. Rather than being angry with Abraham, God patiently reassured him that Sarah would bear the child of promise. And he even at this point gave Abraham's child a name, Isaac. And as if this wasn't enough to strengthen Abraham's faith, God repeated his promise a fifth time. And this fifth encounter with God stands out from the others because this time God visited Abraham in person. In person. And not only that, God spoke directly to Sarah. Three men who are collectively identified in the Bible as the Lord, three men, visited Abraham and Sarah's tent. And the way Abraham responded to them suggests that he knew he was in the presence of God. Instead of waiting for them to approach his home, which would have been customary, Abraham ran to meet them and he bowed low to the ground in a posture that was usually reserved for royalty, for kings. And one of the three men promised that Sarah would have a baby boy by that time next year. And the writer suggests that the spokesperson was the Lord, not an angel, the Lord. Now, there are a number of different views about this, but I believe this is what theologians call a Christophany, which is a pre-incarnate appearance of Jesus in human form. I believe Abraham, without realizing it, met his own descendant during this encounter. Try and get your mind around that. I believe he met his own descendant in this encounter. When Sarah overheard what was said, her response echoed Abraham's in his previous encounter with God. She laughed sarcastically, just as he had done. She laughed in disbelief. She couldn't see past her limitations. As far as she was concerned, she was a worn-out old woman, way past childbearing age. As far as she was concerned, having a son was impossible. Whilst faith trusts in God's promises, unbelief fixates on limitations. Faith trusts in God's promises. Unbelief fixates on limitations. How did the Lord respond to Sarah's unbelief? Well, you know how he responded. He remained faithful. He shifted her focus away from her limitations to his greatness. He reminded Sarah of who he is. A faithful God who has the power to keep his promises. A faithful God for whom nothing at all is impossible, including reversing the aging process. And he said to her, he spoke directly to her, "Is anything too hard for the Lord? Is anything too hard for the Lord?" The New Testament tells us, by faith, even Sarah, who was past childbearing age, was enabled to bear children because she considered him faithful who had made the promise. She considered him, the Lord, to be faithful, the one who had made the promise. After 25 years of waiting, God proved faithful. Faithful to Abraham and Isaac, and Abraham and Sarah, and they had Isaac, their first and only child together, the child of God's promise. Well, the name Isaac means laughter, Both Abraham and Sarah had responded to God's promise by laughing sarcastically in unbelief. But their sarcastic laughter was replaced with joyful laughter when God's promise was finally realized. Abraham is widely considered to be the father of faith. The father of faith. Because he left his homeland for an unknown destination simply because God told him to. And each time God told him that he would have a son, he did believe it. He did believe it. However, as we've seen, Abraham's faith was far from perfect. There were times when it wavered and faltered, and even times when he came close to losing it. But Abraham never lost his faith. He never lost his faith. Why? I think you know the answer. Because God remained faithful. God remained faithful. Every time Abraham struggled with unbelief, God reassured him by repeating his promise. And every time God did this, it was as if he was saying to Abraham, don't look at your circumstances. Don't look at yourself. Look at me. Look at me. Keep your eyes fixed on me. I'm the one who initiated your faith. And I'm the one who will perfect it. I'm the one who will perfect it. God didn't simply keep Abraham's faith alive, keep it on life support. He strengthened it. He strengthened it. Abraham's faith grew strong enough to withstand the most severe testing. God called on Abraham to sacrifice that which was most precious to him, his only son, Isaac, the son he'd waited 25 years for. And God called on him to give him up. And at the moment Abraham picked up the knife to kill Isaac, God called out to him and said, "Don't lay a hand on the boy. Do not hurt him in any way. For now I know that you truly fear God. You have not withheld from me even your son, your only son." Abraham was willing to give up Isaac because he believed that God would give him back. He believed that God would give him back. That's how strong his faith had become. You see, God had told Abraham that his covenant promise would be fulfilled exclusively through Isaac, not through Ishmael or anyone else, but exclusively through Isaac. Abraham knew that, and he believed it at this point. Abraham knew that God would remain faithful to his promise, even if it meant raising Isaac from the dead. Raising Isaac from the dead. You see, the New Testament tells us that Abraham believed in resurrection. The reason Abraham was so sure of this was because time and time again, God had remained faithful. And following this profound mountaintop experience, God affirmed his promise to Abraham once more, so a sixth time. But this time, God made his promise more explicit. He said, through your seed, all the nations of the earth shall be blessed because you have obeyed my voice, because you have obeyed me. God told Abraham that the world would be blessed through one of his descendants. He didn't tell him how the world would be blessed, though. But like Isaac, that descendant would be taken to a place of sacrifice. But unlike Isaac, that descendant wouldn't be spared, but would die as an atoning sacrifice for the sins of the world. In his letter to the Romans, the Apostle Paul wrote, Abraham is the spiritual father of those who have faith. Abraham is the spiritual father of those who have faith. He's our spiritual father if we have faith. But that statement that Paul made is true in more ways than one. Our faith is like Abraham's because it saves. It's saving faith. It's faith that makes us right with God. And our faith is like Abraham's because just like his, it wavers and falters. And some of us may have even come close to losing it. But we never will. We never will. Why? Because God is faithful. Because God is faithful. God's faithfulness and his unchanging character acted as a muscle builder, strengthening Abraham's faith. And the same is true of us. God's faithfulness and unchanging character acts as a muscle builder, strengthening our faith. The Apostle Paul wrote this to the believers in Philippi. I am certain, he said, I am certain that God, who began a good work in you, will continue his work until it is finally finished on the day that Christ returns. He will continue the work he has begun in you until it is completed. And that will be on the day Jesus returns. God's good work in us will continue and be completed because he is faithful. Jesus is the author of our faith and the one who strengthens it and perfects it. Let's turn our eyes away from ourselves and our circumstances and keep them fixed on him because he is faithful.